After I got pregnant, my husband seemed like a completely different person. Not only was he working overtime and going on business trips all day, but he also complained that I didn't do any housework at home. On our 7th wedding anniversary, my husband's first love, Adele, posted an update on social media. The person who came over to freeload just had to take advantage of the situation. In the video, the man who once promised me a lifetime together was kissing someone else passionately. Someone commented, "A match made in heaven." I saved and liked the post, and a few minutes later, Adele called me. She cried and told me not to mind, saying that everyone was just drunk at the party. Griffin took the phone and said, "She's already apologized, don't be unreasonable." I sat silently on the plane as I left and sent him the divorce agreement. 1. I ruined the cake I spent all morning making. If I hadn't seen Adele's social media post, I wouldn't have known that Griffin changed his plans for tonight. I contacted a divorce lawyer and packed some of my belongings. When he came back, he quickly noticed that there were fewer things. The man frowned unhappily. "Adele is afraid you misunderstood what happened yesterday, so she specially bought this for you." He handed me a green box containing 2 cans of Longjing tea. Adele's intentions were too obvious. I threw the tea leaves into the trash can with a flick of my wrist. "That's quite a tea party." Griffin's face turned pale instantly, and he pushed me down, and I hit the corner of the coffee table hard. "Beatrice, Adele kindly sent you something as an apology. Don't be ungrateful." Griffin's fierce look made me feel strange. He wasn't like this before. When we first got together, I was not good at cooking, so I learned to cook for him. When I accidentally cut my hand, he immediately rushed into the kitchen. He looked at me with a look of heartache and told me never to touch these things again, that he would feel bad if I got hurt. But he has completely changed in the past 2 years, especially now that Adele, whom he has been thinking about, has returned. My thoughts were pulled back by the pain in my head. I sat on the floor, covering my head, and my body couldn't help but tremble, perhaps afraid that I might really be seriously injured. Griffin finally deigned to look at me and squatted down to look at my wound. He helped me up with a gentle tone. "How could you be so stupid? Don't you know how to dodge?" He had just picked up his car keys and was about to take me to the hospital, but his phone rang at that moment. He glanced at it and immediately answered. "What's wrong?" "Adele." A crying voice came from the other end of the phone. "Griffin, can you come and keep me company?" Griffin looked at me with a complicated expression and closed the door heavily without hesitation. Over the past 2 years, he has left me countless times for Adele. I've been through this scene over and over again. Although I knew it would be like this, my heart still ached. If it were in the past, I would definitely cry and make a fuss with him. But now I'm tired, physically and mentally exhausted. I went to the hospital alone and had a series of examinations. I had a thick bandage on my head. The doctor said that the wound on my head was not a big problem, but the ultrasound showed that I had an ectopic pregnancy and could hemorrhage at any time, threatening my life. I needed to be hospitalized immediately, and my family needed to sign the consent form. 2. Hearing that, the last string in my heart snapped. I ran to the bathroom and cried my heart out before I started contacting Griffin, but my calls and messages went unanswered. After much hesitation, I called my mom. "Mom, I'm at the hospital. Can you come and sign for me?" On the other end of the phone was the sound of mahjong tiles colliding and an impatient tone. "Ask Griffin to sign for you. I'm busy." You wouldn't have quarreled with him, would you? Just lower your head, admit your mistake, and be a little more accommodating. There's no couple that doesn't argue. His family is so rich, just endure it. I hummed in response and hung up. I had worked hard with Griffin all the way, from starting from scratch to now a listed company. But my mom thought I was lucky to have found such a potential stock. I had secretly rejoiced over it before. But over the 7 years, I had worked just as hard as Griffin for the company. One thing after another, I felt like I couldn't breathe. I called Griffin's number again and again in the ward. From day to night, I finally got through. On the other end of the phone was Adele's voice. "What's wrong?" "Griffin is taking a shower." My heart sank. So they were enjoying their time together. He was so busy that he wasn't even willing to answer one of my calls. And he still thought of me at such a time? It made me feel sick. Give the phone to him, I have. Before I could finish, Griffin's roar came from the other end. You've been calling all day. It's just a bump. You're acting like you're dying. Is that necessary? Griffin clearly saw my wound, but he just said it was a bump. He just didn't care. I said calmly, I'm pregnant. On the other end of the phone, Griffin was silent for a moment. You bumped your head and got pregnant. Can't you even lie properly? With that, Griffin hung up the phone and blocked my number. In his eyes, I was a woman who would always fight for him and use any means necessary. A year ago, I used a pregnancy test and found out I was pregnant. I excitedly told him, but he didn't seem very excited. He reluctantly accompanied me for a prenatal checkup, only to find out that I had a molar pregnancy. He turned around and left without looking back, even though I was about to have surgery immediately. Later, I found out that Adele had just quarreled with him that day because he didn't accompany her to go shopping on time. 3. I found Adele's home address from Griffin's good friend Finn. My heart was pounding as I rang the doorbell. Adele opened the door soon after. She was wearing a purple silk nightgown. Griffin had given me the same one, except that it made her skin look even whiter, and we even had similar facial features. Adele scanned my face and smiled victoriously. No wonder Griffin would be with you. I forced myself to speak. I'm here to see Griffin. As soon as I stepped into the room, various memories flooded back. Adele's house was exactly the same as mine. 2 years ago when we were decorating, I wanted to add another wardrobe. It was a very small thing, but Griffin was dead set against it, saying that these things were too complicated and told me not to worry, that I could just leave it all to him. His excuse was so weak back then, but I didn't want to think too much about it. Now that the facts were in front of me, it proved that I was nothing but a complete replacement. All the good things he had done for me in the past were just because he loved someone else. My thoughts were interrupted by Griffin's anger. Beatrice, what does it mean to find this place? Why are you like a piece of gum? Before I could speak, Griffin grabbed my arm and strode out. Adele hid behind him, holding his waist. She looked at me triumphantly, her voice sweet and coquettish. Griffin, why is she here? I'm so scared. Griffin's eyes immediately softened, and his tone became gentle. Good girl, go back first. After saying that, Griffin looked at me as if he wanted to tear me apart. Beatrice, what do you mean by coming to see Adele? She's my bottom line, and she's absolutely off limits to you. I sneered in my heart. Adele was his bottom line. So what about me, who had been married to him for 7 years? Was my love and youth so worthless? My arm was so sore from his grip that I stumbled and fell straight into the fountain. My suppressed emotions finally erupted at that moment. I pounded the water, letting people passing by point and stare at me. I roared at Griffin. I'm pregnant, and I need to have surgery. You need to sign for me. Don't you know you blocked me? Don't you know how excessive you are? More and more people gathered around. Griffin's expression changed from shame to anger. In the past, whether at home or outside, I had always given him enough face as a man. He had always been high and mighty, and had never tasted this kind of experience. Suddenly, the sky was filled with pouring rain. Just as I was about to get up, Adele ran over with an umbrella and stepped on my hand precisely, even grinding it hard. She pretended to be surprised and covered her mouth. I didn't mean to. I wanted to help you up. I'm so sorry. I'm really so clumsy. With that, she threw herself into Griffin's arms. I was quick and grabbed her ankle just as she was about to pounce. Adele fell into the water clumsily and glared at me fiercely, but soon seemed to realize something. She immediately started to whimper. Griffin quickly picked up Adele in a princess carry. He looked at me coldly, spat out the word "get out," and left with Adele in his arms. 4. I arrived at the hospital in a sorry state. My soaked clothes gave off a sour smell, and the bandage on my head was loose and hanging over my face. People on the street looked at me warily, as if I might go crazy at any moment. When the doctor from the morning bandaged my head wound, he emphasized the surgery again. Be careful with your head wound. Don't get it wet again, and the surgery needs to be done as soon as possible. You're in danger at any time. I nodded. I wanted to do it as soon as possible, but Griffin didn't believe me. When I went to the hospital pharmacy to get my medicine, I suddenly heard a familiar sweet female voice behind me. Beatrice. I turned around, and Adele had walked up to me. If it weren't for the fact that you look 5 points similar to me, Griffin probably wouldn't be with you. I stopped and laughed at myself bitterly. Adele held up an ultrasound report and waved it in front of me triumphantly. I'm already pregnant. Griffin will definitely divorce you. I advise you to leave early. I realized too late, and I had put myself in such a humiliating position. I looked at her calmly. Let him sign the surgery form for me, and I'll get a divorce. I didn't want Griffin anymore, and since I had already spoken, it suited me just fine. Adele and I made an appointment for the next day at 7 o'clock. Griffin would sign for me, and I would sign the divorce agreement. The next day, I tidied myself up and went to Adele's house. She was lying in Griffin's arms, enjoying being fed. When we were first together, we were so sweet like this. But 2 years ago, Adele came back. When I coquettishly asked Griffin to feed me, he said it was disgusting. He didn't like it. When Griffin saw me, the movement in his hand stopped abruptly, and his expression instantly became impatient. Why are you here again? Griffin stood up and tried to drive me away. Adele shook his arm and pouted. We're going hiking later. Let Beatrice come too. It's more fun with more people. Hearing this, I immediately refused. Griffin still forcibly dragged me into the car and told me not to ruin Adele's mood. He was driving, and Adele was sitting in the passenger seat, where there was a sticker that said Adele's special seat. Thinking about how the sticker on Griffin's car used to have my name on it, and now it had changed so quickly, it was simply ridiculous. In the car, Adele kept talking about their beautiful past. Their past was precious, and I was just a joke. I gritted my teeth secretly, hesitated for a long time, and finally asked, have I always been a replacement? Griffin was silent for a moment before spitting out one word. Yes. I bit my lip hard and turned my head, letting the wind blow on my face. I wanted to dry the tears that were welling up in my eyes. If that was the case, why did you bother with me in the first place? Clearly, it was Griffin who chased me at the beginning, saying that we would be together for a lifetime, and that's why I firmly chose him. 5. Half an hour later, we reached the foot of the mountain. I walked for a while when my ankle suddenly twisted, and a sharp pain shot through me. Griffin ran towards me with a worried look, took off my high heels, and rubbed my foot. I hissed in pain. He softened the movement of his hands and carried me on his back towards a nearby pavilion. While walking, he complained that I was stupid for wearing high heels to climb a mountain. I sneered. You're the one who dragged me here, right? The other party was stunned for a moment before saying anything. Adele followed behind Griffin, glaring at me resentfully. As soon as they reached the pavilion, Adele pouted and whined. Griffin, her ankle is sprained, so let her rest here. Let's go up by ourselves. Griffin looked hesitant and hesitated before saying, Adele, let's not go today. I didn't want to see them being affectionate in front of me. I shrugged and said, go ahead. After I said that, Griffin looked at me in disbelief. In the past, when Adele was sick, Griffin would go to take care of her. I insisted on going with him, saying that I could help him take care of Adele. At that time, he scolded me for having a dirty mind. Adele immediately joined in. She gently tugged at Griffin's sleeve. Griffin, since she said so, let's not worry about her. Griffin frowned slightly. His gaze lingered on me, and finally he gently stroked her head and said, As soon as they left, I felt that the air in the mountains was much better. I sat leisurely in the pavilion and took a nap. I didn't notice that the sky was gradually covered by dark clouds. Griffin shielded Adele with his body and got drenched in the rain as he ran towards me. Griffin checked the weather forecast and saw that the rain would last until the middle of the night. He walked up to me and bent down. Get on, I'll carry you down. I didn't hesitate at all and climbed onto his back. In this situation, it was of course best if he was willing to carry me down. Griffin hadn't walked far with me on his back. Adele suddenly screamed. Griffin, it hurt so much. Hearing this, he let go of me and let me fall to the ground. He immediately rushed to Adele's side. I was still climbing painfully from the ground. Griffin had already passed me by carrying Adele, leaving behind a sentence. "Beatrice, you should be able to do it yourself." Before I could respond, they were already far away. I limped down the mountain with my sprained ankle. I walked for more than an hour, and every step felt like my foot was about to split open, and I was sweating profusely from the pain. I wanted to call for help. My phone was dead from the rain, so I could only endure it. Just as I was about to reach the foot of the mountain, I slipped and rolled down like a ball. But fortunately, Griffin's car was not far away. I lay on the ground and shouted at Griffin in the car with all my might. "Griffin, save me." He looked back at me and immediately covered Adele's curious eyes. "It's all blood, don't look, it's dirty." I crawled towards his car with all my strength, and I tried to open the car door. His eyes were full of disgust, and he immediately started the engine. Soon he disappeared from my sight. Suddenly, my heart turned to ashes. I didn't expect Griffin to be so heartless. There were very few people coming and going here, especially in such heavy rain. My head was dizzy, so I had to bite my lip to keep myself awake. I don't know how long I lay on the ground before someone finally saw me. In the ambulance, I saw that the entire bedsheet was stained with blood. Soon I was pushed into the operating room and lost consciousness. When I woke up after the surgery, the doctor said that I had sought medical treatment too late and could only remove my uterus to stop the bleeding. After the doctor left, I hid under the covers and cried out loud. I would never have children again. After 7 years of marriage, I had given my heart and soul, but he didn't care about my life or death. So the big gift I prepared for Griffin should be given to him. 6. On the first day I was discharged from the hospital, I immediately contacted a journalist. I spread all the videos and pictures from Adele's social media that were only visible to me for the past 2 years. Soon, Griffin's affair was fermented with exaggeration on the internet. The company's stock price also plummeted due to his scandal. When Griffin saw me, he immediately asked, "Did you do this?" I stared at my phone without blinking. Who else would it be? After a moment of silence, Griffin's face sank. "That's all our years of hard work, just because you're jealous?" I used to work day and night with Griffin to come up with plans. I drank until I had stomach cramps to win over clients. Later, when the company became stronger, I handed over all the power to him. I interrupted him and threw the divorce agreement on the table. Divorce. Griffin looked at me in surprise, and after a few seconds, he tore up the divorce agreement with a sarcastic smile. "Don't pretend, I'm not buying it." I broke free from him and walked towards the entrance with my luggage. He caught up with me in 2 or 3 steps and grabbed me. "It's just to give you a little taste of your own medicine. There's no need to be like this." Seeing that I was still walking, he roared angrily, "If you dare to go out this door today, don't come crawling back to me." I sneered and walked out of the door with my luggage without looking back. In the past, Griffin would get angry at me on the street and say I was petty and wanted to divorce me. I would kneel on the ground and beg him not to abandon me. I was tired of such a humble life. As I was about to get into the car with my luggage, Griffin rushed over, grabbed my hand, and looked at me with a "you should be satisfied now" expression. He said that as long as I went back, he would forgive me. I pried his hand open and said word by word, "Get lost, get a divorce." The taxi driver was impatient and asked rudely, "Hurry up, are you getting in or not?" I immediately got into the car and was about to close the door when Griffin risked having his fingers pinched. He pried open the car door and squeezed in. Griffin forced a stiff smile. "Beatrice, didn't you say you wanted to watch a movie together?" In the past, I always wanted to watch movies with him, but he always said it was a waste of time. Every time I went alone, watching other couples together. Without allowing me to refuse, the man directly stuffed money into the driver's hand and told him to drive to the cinema. Griffin dragged me in forcefully. Halfway through the movie, Griffin's phone rang. Griffin immediately flipped his phone over and went outside to answer the call. I still saw it. It was Adele calling. When the movie ended, Griffin hadn't come back. I blocked all of Griffin's contact information. In the middle of the night, the phone kept ringing frantically. Without even looking, I picked it up and was about to curse. Griffin's hoarse voice said, "I'm sorry. I had something urgent to do during the day. I won't do this again. Can you please answer my calls? I exposed that he went to find Adele. I hung up the phone directly. 7. The next day I called a board meeting. Griffin arrived last, with a large bruise on his face, and the smell of alcohol still lingering. I looked at him coldly and made a casual suggestion. Griffin, with all these recent scandals, maybe you should step down and calm things down? I thought it would be a tough battle. Unexpectedly, Griffin agreed himself. It only took an hour, and I replaced his position. After the meeting, Griffin stopped me at the door. The smile on my face vanished. I didn't know why he agreed, but I knew I didn't want to see him. He looked at me with a look of grievance and lowered his head, explaining to me, "Yesterday, I really had something urgent." I sneered. Adele was his urgent matter. I pushed him away forcefully, not wanting to hear him continue to talk nonsense. The man grabbed my hand tightly, his eyes red. "What do I have to do to forgive me?" I curled my lips. I said word by word, "Get down on your knees and beg me." Faced with my excessive request, Griffin's face darkened. How could such a proud man kneel in front of me in public? After a moment of silence, with a bang, Griffin knelt at my feet. His appearance made me feel even more disgusted. I took off the wedding ring on my finger and threw it into the nearby trash can under Griffin's gaze. He, who always had a cleanliness fetish, frantically rummaged through the trash can. I really laughed at him. When I loved him before, he trampled me madly. Now I don't care, he doesn't deserve it. I rolled my eyes and left with the "you deserve it." At 9 o'clock in the evening, I was lying in bed, ready to relax by watching videos. I scrolled to Adele. In the video, Adele was being held by a man. The man was muttering, "Adele, don't go." As Adele struggled, Griffin ran over. Without saying a word, he punched the man and they started fighting. In the comments, some people recognized Griffin and Adele. Isn't this the company boss who was exposed for infidelity a while ago? This woman looks familiar. I think I've seen her. One comment at the bottom caught my attention. "You stinky bitch, stealing men behind my back." I clicked on this person's homepage, and it was full of intimate photos with Adele. This is the man in the video. I sent him a private message. "You know Adele?" Soon the other party replied, "That woman is my wife. She ran away with a rich man and doesn't want to come back." After chatting with him for a long time, I learned more or less about their story. The next afternoon, I had just finished a meeting. When I entered the office, Adele appeared out of nowhere. She clenched her fists and asked me, "Where is Griffin?" My eyes fell on the diamond ring on her finger, which was the one I had thrown away yesterday. I immediately called security. Before I could connect, Adele rushed over and hung up with a slap. Adele's brows were furrowed. "Griffin is missing. I can't get in touch with him." I ignored her and glared at her impatiently. She immediately put on a pitiful look and started to cry. "You know I'm pregnant. The child can't be without a father." Not wanting to waste my breath on her, I gestured for her to call herself. Adele picked up my phone and dialed the number, and it was almost answered immediately. She was obviously disappointed. After a while on the phone, Adele looked even more melancholy, her voice mixed with a faint cry. "Can you come back soon?" After a while, she hung up the phone. She stood there looking at me. I asked impatiently, "Aren't you leaving?" Her eyes flickered. She lowered her head and hesitated. "I only have Griffin. Can you not fight with me?" Hearing this, I laughed out loud. Clearly, it was she who was the third party and destroyed my marriage. Yet she had the audacity to say it as if I was bullying her. I just gave her one word: get out. 8. In the evening, I ordered takeout and opened the door without hesitation. Before I could see clearly, Griffin had already rushed in. I didn't know how he knew my address, but I knew I didn't want to see him. Griffin grabbed my hand and lowered his eyes. "Beatrice, I know I was wrong. Can we start over?" I pried his fingers apart one by one. "Get out. Don't force me to call the police." Griffin was too arrogant. I wasn't someone he could summon at will. I no longer wanted him. As if he hadn't heard, he took a box out of his pocket and handed it to me. Inside was a diamond ring much larger than a wedding ring. "It's too expensive." I gave it back to him. Griffin immediately grabbed my hand and forced it onto me. "Once you wear it, it's yours." I used to love his domineering ways. Whatever he wanted me to do, I would do it according to his wishes. Now I just felt so stupid back then. I sneered. What about the other one? Griffin pretended not to understand and shook his head. He couldn't not know I was asking about the wedding ring. I said directly, "It's on Adele's hand. Does she just like second-hand goods?" Griffin immediately stammered and tried to explain, but he couldn't say anything after hesitating for a long time. I took off the ring, stuffed it back into his hand, and told him to get out. He hugged me from behind. "We have a child. A child can't be without a father." I never thought a person could be so shameless. I asked him to let go of me, but he held me tighter. Struggling, I picked up a vase and smashed it at him. Blood slid down his forehead, and he became even more aggressive. He bit my neck and said softly, "I love you." The last time he said that was at our wedding 7 years ago, and I was moved to tears. I gave him my whole heart. I stopped struggling and simply said, "I don't love you anymore." Hearing this, Griffin stopped and looked at me incredulously. How could? "We still have a child. You have to think about the child for my sake." I was really amused by him. That day, I was lying in a pool of blood. He actually still thought I could give birth to a child. I took out the discharge record and slapped it in front of him. After a moment of silence, big tears fell. He knelt at my feet and slapped himself with my hand. "It's all my fault. I didn't know it would be like this. It's all my fault." He repeated it over and over. I looked at him indifferently. I just found it ridiculous. I ignored his bewildered and regretful eyes. Folding my arms, I said calmly, "Get out with nothing." He agreed very readily, taking advantage of the fact that he felt guilty towards me now. I quickly had him sign the agreement. I made an appointment with him to get the divorce certificate at 8 o'clock in the morning. I arrived at the Civil Affairs Bureau half an hour early to wait for him. It was almost 9 o'clock, but he hadn't shown up yet. I called Griffin's number, but no one answered. Just as I was about to leave, Adele stopped me. She walked straight towards me. "You can't let him leave with nothing." I curled my lips indifferently. "What are you? Where's Griffin?" She glared at me angrily. "I'm his future wife. Griffin needs money now. You can't be so cruel." I didn't say anything. I just flipped out the photo of her and Emerson. I watched her terrified expression with amusement. Clearly, she was already a married woman, yet she was talking about being a future wife. She was already a married woman. I looked at her with contempt and saw her retreat. After a moment, she spoke with difficulty. "You can humiliate me however you want, as long as you don't tell Griffin about this." I smiled without speaking. I didn't humiliate her. I just made her climb a mountain. But after she left, I told Emerson. 2 days later, I received a strange call. It was Finn, telling me that Griffin was dying. I was startled for a moment when I heard that, but I quickly calmed down. I just said to let him die far away. But I still went to the hospital. He was lying on the bed looking weak. But thinking about how I was lying in a pool of blood and begging him for help that day, I just felt that he wasn't miserable enough. When he saw me, a flash of surprise crossed his eyes. In just a few days, he had become much thinner. He squeezed out an ugly smile. "Beatrice, it's great that you can come see me." I asked indifferently, "What disease?" He moved his lips slightly, with an expression of difficulty. He just said he wanted me to go with him to see the cherry blossoms again. We had our first kiss under the cherry blossom tree. When he looked at me, love was about to overflow from his eyes. Later, I learned that it was under the cherry blossom tree that he had his first kiss with Adele. He was with me while loving someone else. I shook my head, feeling more and more disgusted. "I'm just here to see how you die." He lowered his eyes, his tone apologetic. "I owe her. 2 years ago, I rejected Adele. She went out to get drunk and met the wrong person. I've always felt guilty about her. All along, the one I love is." I made a shushing gesture, interrupting him. Because he owed another woman, he trampled me underfoot. It was disgusting. Griffin blushed and tried to hug me, but I stopped him with a cold look. The awkward atmosphere was interrupted by Adele's opening the door. She was wearing a short-sleeved long pants, and there were large bruises on the exposed arms. When she saw me sitting by Griffin's bed, her face began to contort. She angrily asked me, "You shameless thing. How dare you still show up?" I shrugged. Before I could speak, Griffin said first, "Get out." Adele's face turned red instantly. She walked to Griffin's bedside, wrapped her arm around his, and cried like a pear blossom in rain. Griffin looked conflicted. Noticing my gaze, he pushed Adele away belatedly. I smiled indifferently. Don't pretend. As soon as I stood up and was about to leave, Griffin grabbed the hem of my clothes tightly. I slapped his hand away hard. "People like you should die early." Hearing this, Adele immediately rushed towards me angrily, ready to hit me. Before her slap landed on me, Griffin grabbed her hand. Then Griffin gave her a crisp slap. She blushed, ran out crying. Griffin looked at me and lowered his head. I left with a sneer. So cheap. 10. A month later, I received a call from Finn. Griffin was dead. I was a little surprised. When I first went to see him, although he looked very weak, I didn't expect him to die so soon. He left a will, and all his property was transferred to my name. I returned to the house I hadn't been to for a long time, packed up his belongings, and prepared to throw them away. A diagnostic report fell out of the notebook. It was from 2 months ago, and Griffin had been diagnosed with AIDS. I was stunned for a moment. On his computer, I also saw a lot of explicit photos of Adele and various men, all taken in the past 2 years. At the bottom of the message list, there was a video sent by Emerson, with a note asking Griffin to save Adele. In the video, Emerson was dragging Adele on the mountain. He was also muttering curses. "Bitch." Then the video ended. Thinking back to the headless corpse on the news 2 days ago, it was exactly the same as the clothes Emerson was wearing in the video. I couldn't help but gasp. I immediately saved the video to my phone and prepared to go to the nearby police station to report it. As soon as I opened the door, Adele rushed towards me. Before I could react, she fell on top of me. She looked ferocious, holding a knife, and glared at me viciously. "It's all your fault, you ruined me." I pressed her hand tightly and struggled. As I struggled, I picked up a small stool nearby and smashed it on her head. Then I immediately ran back to the bedroom, locked the door, and called the police. After a while, I heard the sound of the key turning in the lock. Then I remembered that her house and mine might have the same key. Click, the door opened. Adele approached me step by step. "You killed Griffin, you killed Emerson, it's all your fault. You're a bitch. I'm going to kill you." After saying that, she rushed towards me, and I held the stool in front of me. The knife had already stabbed in front of my eyes, and I pushed her away with all my strength. As I fell, the knife stabbed into her own chest. I ran out immediately. The police came, and I handed them the video on my phone. This farce was finally over.